the drifter boy hid in the ranger's cabin at 8,000 feet. Then heard the emergency bulletin on the radio at 8,000 feet. The cabin sat in a bowl of white peaks, and the quiet pressed on the ears like deep water. He'd tracked a last thread of wood smoke up to its door and found it empty. 5 days now up here at the top of the world, and no one alive knew where he was. He scrapes the frost from the window and looks out at a sky that had been clean an hour ago. It is gone. The peaks that ring the bowl are erased, the light gone, a bruised yellow, the whole enormous view swallowed into a moving gray, and the first hard grains of snow are already ticking against the glass. Not the soft fall of the last 5 days, but something with grit and speed in it, driven, the leading edge of the thing the radio is still describing behind him. He had been cranking the little set for the company of a voice when the music cut out and the tone came, long, flat, the one everyone knows and dreads. The emergency tone that means, stop what you are doing and listen. And then someone clipped an official, had read a bulletin for the high country, and had named the exact range he is sitting in the middle of, and had told anyone above 7,000 feet to get down tonight. He stands at the window with the frost melting under his palm and does the arithmetic the bulletin has handed him, and it is the worst kind of arithmetic, the kind with death on both sides of the equals sign. The bulletin says, get down, but down means the passes, the 2 narrow saddles that are the only ways out of this bowl, and the passes, he knows without being told, are exactly where a storm like this kills people. The slopes above them, loading with new snow hour by hour until they let go, so that to walk down through them tonight would be to walk under 100 loaded guns, blind, in the dark, in the wind, with no way to see a slope let go until it was already on him, and the cabin behind him is warm. The cabin is solid, a real Forest Service patrol cabin built by people who knew this country, its logs squared and chinked and standing through God, knew how many winters, with a barrel stove throwing heat and a wall of canned goods and 5 days of split firewood stacked dry beside it. A place a person could sit out any storm the sky could make, in comfort and safety, and step out into a clean, bright morning when it was over, stay and be safe and warm while the passes fill with the snow that would kill him if he ran, run and take his chances under the loaded slopes in the dark. The bulletin says run everything he can see, everything he can feel, everything the warm room at his back is telling him, says stay. He does not yet know the third thing, the thing that will not be on either side of the arithmetic until he opens a certain logbook, that both of the choices in front of him can be wrong at the same time, and that the mountain has already drawn, in a dead man's pencil, the answer to a question he does not yet know he is asking. He goes back to the stove and feeds it, and tells himself he is staying, because staying is what the cabin is for. He tells himself the bulletin is written for people caught in the open, for hikers and hunters with no walls around them, not for a person who has a stove and a roof and 5 days of wood. He tells himself that the smart thing, the survivor's thing, is to sit tight in good shelter and let the danger pass by outside. It is a good argument. It is the argument that will kill him. But he does not know that yet, and so he feeds the fire and lets its warmth talk him toward the choice the warmth wants. It is a good cabin, and in 5 days he has come to trust it the way he used to trust a very little. He had found it by tracking smoke. Days ago, low and cold and out of options, he had seen a thin gray thread rising against the peaks and followed it up, hour after hour, into thinner and thinner air, certain he was walking toward people and a fire, and the trouble people and fires always mean for someone like him, and had come over a rise into the bowl to find not a camp but this. A patrol cabin, its chimney breathing the last of a banked fire, and no one home. A ranger's cabin, built for a Forest Service man who patrolled the high country in the season and had gone down. He could see, before the passes closed, the stove banked low, the bunk made, the door latched but not locked, a wall of supplies laid in, and a logbook on the table, and, on a nail by the door, the small, ordinary signs of a working life at altitude. He had let himself in the way he let himself into everywhere, quietly, ready to leave, and no one had come, and the fire had not quite died, and he had fed it, and stayed. 5 days, 5 days of the deepest peace and the deepest strangeness. The bowl at 8,000 feet was a world scoured down to essentials, rock and snow and sky and cold, and the small stubborn warmth of the stove. And up in it, he had felt the ordinary weight of his life thin out with the air, felt the debt and the keys and the closed door recede until they were almost bearable. The silence was different from any he had known, not the empty silence of a road at night, but a vast held stillness, the whole ring of peaks standing guard around the bowl, the snow taking every sound and folding it away, so that the loudest thing in his days was the tick of the stove, and the loudest thing in his nights was his own heartbeat, and once, far off, the long groan of a cornice, calving somewhere on the high rim. He had eaten another man's canned peaches, and read another man's logbook, and slept in the warmth of another man's fire. He had melted snow for water on the barrel stove, and split the ranger's wood to keep the fire fed, and swept the plank floor, because a swept floor was a way of deserving the shelter. He had stood at the little window at dawn, and watched the sun come up over the rim and set the whole bowl blazing, and had thought, more than once, that he could vanish up here, that a person could live in the thin, bright air above the reach of everything he owed, until the debt simply forgot him. The tracking of the smoke had brought him to it. 5 days back, low and cold and out of options, he had seen a thin gray thread rising against the peaks and followed it up, hour after hour, into thinner and thinner air, his lungs burning with the altitude, certain he was walking toward people and a fire, and the trouble people and fires always mean for someone like him. He had rehearsed, climbing, the excuses he would give, the quick retreat he would make. And he had come over the last rise into the bowl, braced for all of it, and found instead only the cabin, breathing the last of a banked fire, and no one home, and the enormous silence. And he had understood that the smoke he tracked had not been a person at all, but only the dying breath of a fire a departed ranger had banked days before, a thread of warmth left burning in an empty house, leading him, like everything up here, to a shelter its owner had already left. He had not thought hard about coming down. The passes had been open when he came up. He had assumed, the way you assume the floor will be there, that they would be open when he chose to leave. Now a bulletin has named his range and told him to run, and the snow is ticking harder on the glass, and the passes are closing hour by hour, and the assumption is gone. The debt is the reason he is up here at all, and it is the thing the storm finally makes him face. He takes the keys out of his pocket without deciding to. The ring of house keys he has carried for a year and will never use. 4 keys to 4 locks on a house that is no longer his, that a debt closed behind him for good. And he sits at the ranger's table and turns them over in the stove light while the storm builds outside. And for the first time in a year he lets himself go all the way into the memory instead of stopping at its edge. The house had been his family's, the only home he had ever had. A plain house on a plain street that had held them all through everything until it didn't. The debt had been his father's, incurred in the slow, ordinary way debts are, a little at a time, against the house itself, and then, when his father was gone the way that leaves no forwarding address, the way that leaves the bills behind and takes the man. The debt had been the family's, and then, in the particular way these things resolve, the debt had become his. He was the one who was there. He was the one old enough to sign, old enough to sit across the desk from the people the money was owed to, and promise them, in the reckless way of a young person who does not yet know the size of the world's numbers, that he would find a way to keep the house. He had believed it when he said it. That was the part he could not forgive himself, that he had promised and meant it, and then discovered that meaning it changed nothing, that the number was simply larger than any work a boy could do, larger than double shifts and skipped meals, and every desperate arithmetic. He ran at that same kind of kitchen table, night after night, until the nights ran out, and the family that was left had needed someone to be the reason it was lost. That is a thing he understands now at 8,000 feet that he could not understand then. That grief needs a shape, that loss needs a face, and that he had been standing right there, holding the keys, the one who had promised and failed, the most convenient face in the room. They had put him out, not with violence, with something quieter and more final, a slow, cold decision that he was the debt now, that as long as he was gone the shame could go with him, and they had let him take the keys because the keys were worthless, the house already lost, and a boy walking away with the keys to a foreclosed house was exactly the kind of useless gesture that let everyone left behind pretend it had been his alone to lose. He has carried them for a year. He has told himself a year of stories about why, that he keeps them to remember, that he keeps them out of spite, that he will one day walk back and put a key in a lock just to prove the door was ever his. Sitting at the ranger's table with the storm coming, he lets himself understand the true reason, which is smaller and worse, and finally bearable. He keeps them because as long as he holds the keys, the failure is still happening, still live, still his. And if he ever set them down, he would have to admit that it is over, that the house is gone, and the family is gone, and the debt is paid in the only coin they would take, which was him, and that there is nothing left to do about any of it but live. He has not been willing to admit that. The keys have been his way of not admitting it. He turns them over in the stove light, 4 useless keys, and for the first time, their weight feels like something he is allowed to put down. Then he opens the ranger's logbook to pass the time, and the logbook tells him the cabin is a trap. He had read it before idly, the weather notes, and the trail conditions, and the small dry entries of a working life, but he reads it now with the storm in his ears, looking for anything the ranger knew about this bowl in weather like this, and he finds it not in words at first, but in a map. Folded into the back of the log is the ranger's own map of the bowl, hand-marked over years of patrolling it, the kind of map a person makes, not for anyone else but for themselves, a record of everything the ground has taught them, and on it, above the cabin, drawn in faded pencil and gone over more than once, pressed hard enough in places to score the paper, is a long tapering shape with an arrow, and beside it 3 letters he does not know, and then, in the ranger's cramped hand, 2 words he does: slide path. The shape starts high, at the loaded slope at the head of the bowl, and narrows through a throat in the timber, and spreads at the bottom into a broad fan, the runout. He will come to understand the place an avalanche off that slope would stop, would spend the last of its speed, would lay down the tons of snow it carried. And the cabin, the small, careful square of the cabin, drawn in the same faded pencil, sits inside the fan, inside the runout. At the very bottom of the path, directly in the spread of it, exactly where the snow comes to rest. He goes cold in a way the stove cannot touch. He gets up and goes to the window and scrapes the frost again and looks up, into the moving gray, toward the head of the bowl, where the slope must be, and he cannot see it through the storm. And that is somehow worse. To know that up there, hidden in the white, a whole mountainside is quietly filling with the weight that will come down here. The ranger knew. Of course the ranger knew. That is why the ranger goes down before the passes close. Why the cabin is a summer and shoulder season cabin, occupied only when the high slope is bare, or melted out, or frozen hard and stable, and abandoned, always, before the winter cycle begins. The cabin is not built to survive an avalanche. Nothing is built to survive an avalanche. It is built to be empty when the avalanches run. And the slope above it, the long loaded slope at the head of the bowl, is filling right now, hour by hour, grain by driven grain, with the new snow of the storm the Bulletin named, the snow that is ticking on the glass, the snow that will load the starting zone past the point the old snow beneath can hold it, until the whole slab breaks free at once and comes down the path and through the throat and across the fan and buries, under 20 feet of snow gone hard as poured concrete, the small, warm, solid cabin that a boy has spent 5 days learning to trust. Stay, he had reasoned, and be safe while the passes fill. But the cabin is not the safe place, waiting out the danger. The cabin is the target the danger is aiming at. The warm walls are the trap, and he has been sitting inside them, feeding the stove, calling it shelter. The Bulletin was right, and his reasoning was wrong, and the difference between them is where he might live. He makes himself sit still and think it all the way through, the way the mountain has taught him to think, because panic will kill him faster than the slope will. The false choice, the one the Bulletin's fear and his own had built between them, was stay or run, sit in the warm trap or flee down the killing passes. Both of those are death. Staying means the slab. Running the passes means the loaded slopes above the saddles, other paths, other guns. But there is a third thing, and it is a matter of reading the ground and reading the clock, and the ranger's map has just taught him how to read both. The danger is not the whole mountain. It is specific. It is this slide path and its runout, the one loaded slope above and the one fan below. Everything the danger will do, it will do along that drawn line. So the answer is not up or down, but out of the path. Get off the drawn line. And the map shows him where, the strip of dense old timber that flanks the bowl's east side, heavy mature forest, because real timber anchors the snowpack, breaks a slope into pieces too small to release as one clean deadly slab, gives an avalanche nothing to become. Snow does not slide, in force, out of a stand of big trees. The timber is the one ground in reach that no path crosses. He does not have to go down tonight at all. He only has to move a few 100 yards, out of the fan, into the trees, onto ground the mountain cannot bury. And then the clock, which is the harder half. The slope above is loading, but has not yet let go. The new snow is still falling, still bonding to the old surface, still building toward the moment the slab fails, and that moment is not now. It is later, tonight in the deep hours, or the gray, still dawn after, when the loading peaks and the temperature shifts and the whole cycle runs. the way cycles always run, at the storm's end and just past it, not at its beginning, which means the safe hours are the early ones, now. While the storm is still building and the slope has not yet reached its breaking weight. The instinct, his and anyone's, is to wait for the storm to pass, wait for it to be survivable, to travel, wait for the clear, comfortable morning, and then move. But the clear, comfortable morning is the exact hour the slope comes down. To wait for comfort is to wait, precisely, in the run-out for the avalanche. The comfort is the trap inside the trap. The move that feels insane, leaving a warm, solid cabin to walk out into a building blizzard in the dark, is the only move that lives, because it is the only move made in the last safe hour instead of the first deadly one. He has to trade the warm, wrong safety for the cold, right danger, and he has to do it now, before the mountain decides for him. He gets up from the table and begins, fast now, to get ready to go. He cranks the radio one more time before he leaves, and this time a person answers. The little set is not only a receiver. It is one of the old Forest Service field radios, hand-cranked, built to raise a base station from a cabin with no power, and he had not tried to transmit on it, because a person like him does not call for help, does not put his voice on an official channel, does not invite the world to come and find him, but he is about to walk into a storm at 8,000 feet, and some thin thread of sense says that one soul should know a person is out here, and so he cranks the handle until the set has life and keys it and speaks, his voice strange to him, rough, unused to being aimed at anyone, and gives the cabin's name off the logbook and says he is leaving it, on foot, for the timber, ahead of the slide. And a voice answers. A dispatcher, a base station, somewhere far down the mountain, a tired human voice startled to hear this cabin speak at all, because this cabin is supposed to be empty and closed for the season. And the boy hears, in the half-second before the voice becomes professional, the small human sound of a stranger being glad he is alive, and involuntary, "Oh, thank God, someone's up there," before the training takes over. The dispatcher does not waste time on who he is or how he came to be there. That, the voice seems to understand, is a conversation for a warm room and a later day. What matters now is the ground and the clock. The dispatcher confirms what the map told him, that the Bowls East Timber is the safe ground, that the slide path runs exactly where the ranger marked it, that the whole range is forecast to cycle tonight and into the morning, and tells him he is right, dead right, to get out of the run-out now and not wait for light. And there is something in the voice when it says it, some professional relief, that tells the boy the dispatcher has spent nights on this radio hearing people reason themselves into the warm wrong choice, and does not often get to hear one reason their way out. The voice gives him the line to hold to reach the timber, the ground to trust, and the ground to stay off, spare and clear, the way you talk a person across dangerous ground you cannot see. And then the voice tells him one more thing. It tells him that when the pass is open and the cycle has run, in a day, in two, they will send someone up for him, that he is not to try the passes alone, not to be a hero, not to become another name in another bulletin, that he is to get to the trees and make a fire and wait, and that they will come and bring him down. Someone will come. He sits with the crank still in his hand and the storm at the glass, and turns that sentence over and over, because it is a sentence no one has said to him in a year. Not come to put him out, not come to collect what he owes. Come to get him, up a mountain, in the snow, through the closed passes, because a voice on a radio heard him say he was alive and decided that was worth a climb. He does not know how to hold a thing that large. He says copy, in the flat language of the radio, which is the only word he has that is small enough to fit through the fear of being cared about. Then he sets the handset down, and the setting down of it feels, strangely, like the first of the two things he has to leave on this table before he goes. He leaves the keys on the ranger's table. He does it last, when he is dressed in everything he owns, and the pack is on his back, and the door is the only thing left between him and the storm. He takes the ring of house keys out of his pocket. 4 keys to 4 locks on a house that a debt closed a year ago, and he holds them a moment in the stove light, feeling their small familiar weight one final time. The weight he has carried up every road and into every cold room for a year. Then he sets them down on the logbook, on the ranger's careful map, beside the pencil line that showed him the path and saved his life. He does not make a ceremony of it. He just sets them down and takes his hand away, and they lie there in the stove light on the map that told the truth. And the taking away of his hand is the thing he has not been able to do for a year. To admit that it is over, that the house is gone, that the debt is paid in the coin they took, and that there is nothing left to do about any of it but walk out into the weather and live. The keys were his way of keeping the failure alive, his way of standing. Every day, in the doorway of the room he had been put out of, refusing to let it finish closing. He is done standing there. He is done keeping the failure alive. He understands at last, with the storm roaring at the door, that a man cannot walk out onto a mountain that is trying to kill him, while also holding open the door of every room that ever put him out, that the hands he needs for the night ahead cannot be full of the keys to a house that no longer exists. He is choosing, tonight, the one thing the debt and the family and the closed door never let him choose, which is simply to be a person who goes on. And a person who goes on travels light. He leaves the keys for the ranger to find and wonder at, or throw away, or add to the small strange museum of things left behind in a cabin at altitude. And he does not look back at them, and the not looking back is easier than he ever imagined it would be, because there is a storm to walk into, and a line to hold, and, somewhere down the mountain, a voice that said it would come. Then he opens the door, and the storm comes in, the cold like a struck wall, the driven snow filling the warm room in an instant, the roar of the wind in the bowl, enormous and total. And he leans his whole weight into it and goes out, off the target, toward the timber, following a dispatcher's line and a ranger's map and his own hard-won reading of the ground, away from the warm, wrong safety of the cabin and into the cold, right danger of the night. He reaches the trees, and the trees hold. It is the hardest few hundred yards he has ever walked, the wind trying to take him off his feet, the snow erasing the ground under him as fast as he can find it, the dark so complete that the world shrinks to the arm's length his lamp can reach. But he holds the line the voice gave him, out of the fan and across the flank of the bowl, checking his bearing against the black mass of the timber whenever the wind thins enough to show it, and the ground under him changes at last from the smooth, deadly openness of the runout to the broken, anchored, tree-rooted ground of the old forest. He goes in among the great dark trunks and feels the wind break apart above him into 100 smaller winds, and the snow stops driving and starts only falling, and he knows, in his body, that he is off the path. He climbs a little higher into the timber than he strictly needs to, wanting trees above him as well as around him, and gets his back to a big trunk on the uphill side. The way you shelter from what might come down, putting the trunk between yourself and the mountain, and he digs a hollow in the snow at its base and lines it with the boughs he can break, and gets a small fire going in the lee of the roots, feeding it with dead lower branches, and he waits. Somewhere in the black hours after, he hears it, over the wind, from the head of the bowl, a sound he will never forget for the rest of his life. First a deep, soft, enormous whump, felt through the ground as much as heard, the sound of a whole mountainside of snow settling in an instant onto the weak layer that could no longer hold it, and then a silence, a terrible half-second of held breath, and then the roar, building and building, a freight train thunder of moving snow that comes down the path and through the throat, and out across the fan, rolling through the dark where the cabin is, and passes and fades, and is gone, and the silence comes back down. The slope has come down, the cycle has run, the slide has spread across the fan and buried the runout under 20 feet of snow, set instantly hard as poured stone, and the small, warm, solid cabin somewhere beneath it, the cabin he would have been sleeping in. At exactly this hour, the stove ticking, the door latched, certain he was safe, he sits with his back to the tree and his small fire guttering in the snow hollow, and listens to the enormous quiet flood back into the bowl. And he does not feel triumphant, not even relieved, only awake, awake all the way down, aware in a way he has never quite been of how thin the line is between the choice that kills you and the choice that doesn't, and how often, how cruelly often, the warm one is the wrong one. A person could spend a whole life choosing the warm wrong thing. He nearly did, tonight over a stove, with a map in the next room, telling him the truth the whole time. In the morning the storm blows through, and the bowl is blinding and new and utterly changed, the whole head of it swept clean down to old bed, and the fan below buried smooth and white, no sign at all that the cabin was ever there. 5 days of shelter and 100 years of a working life erased in the 10 seconds of the slide. He builds his fire up so the smoke will rise and mark him against the trees, the way he once tracked a thread of smoke up this mountain, toward what he thought was danger, and found instead 5 days of peace and 1 night of the truth. There is a symmetry to it he does not miss, that he came to this bowl following smoke and will leave it making smoke for someone else to follow, and that the whole journey was learning the difference between a warmth that shelters and a warmth that traps, and he waits in the timber for the someone the voice said would come. A thing he has never once done in a year on the road, waited to be found, sat still in a fixed place, and let a stranger close the distance toward him on purpose, instead of always listening behind him for the sound of someone catching up. He watches the two passes out of the bowl, white and silent and slowly, in the hard, new sun, beginning to shed their loaded snow in small harmless sloughs and slides, the mountain quietly unloading itself now that the storm has passed, the danger bleeding off the slopes. Hour by hour, the passes opening again toward the world. He does not know who will come up through them, or when, or what he will owe them, or whether a person who has finally learned to set down one set of keys is ready to be handed anything else at all. Owing has not gone well for him, but he keeps the fire lit, and he watches the passes, and he finds that the waiting does not frighten him the way he expected, that there is even something in it, some small unfamiliar warmth that is not the stove's and does not trap. For the first time in a year, he is not fleeing toward a shelter or listening for a pursuer. He is sitting still in the safe timber above a boiled bowl, warm enough, alive, with empty hands and a lit fire, waiting for someone to arrive.